Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast is number 1451. The topic is Q&A, and the title is, Should You Stretch Before a Workout? So if we consider this question, should you stretch or in some way kind of like prepare your muscles before a workout? A basic example of this is if I want to come into the gym and squat, should I come into the gym and, kind of just get under a barbell and start squatting? Or should I do some things to kind of prepare myself for that movement? The answer is, yeah, of course. You should definitely do some stuff before you prepare yourself for that movement. So we're going to go through and give you an explanation of why that's the answer. But why people typically would think no is they might cite a studies that have said that static stretching, which is where you just kind of get into a position and you just, kind of pull on a muscle. You don't move. There's no like repetitions to it. You just you think about bending over and trying to touch your toes for 60 seconds, or getting into some kind of stretch, like a butterfly stretch, and you're pushing kind of on your adductor muscles for 60 seconds. So static stretches, they have been shown in studies that they may increase the risk of injury if what you're preparing for is an all-out explosive, best you can do type effort. So if it's an explosive effort and if it's at maximum capacity, then static stretching may increase the risk of injury. The reason why is if your muscles are particularly tight, you're, say, a little dehydrated, certain conditions, if you sit there and crank on a muscle pretty hard, you're going to cause small micro tears at the part in which the muscle connects into the connective tissue. You might create some small muscle tissue tears in the area. The reason why is connective tissue doesn't stretch. So you're prying on your muscle. It's like if I keep pulling at a string and pulling at a string and pulling at a string and I load more and more and more weight, you'll see like strands start to fray and break off. We might have seen that in, what are the cartoons where somebody, like a character tries like an anvil over another character's head and the rope starts to break and fray, then pow, So that does happen if you were to sit there and do static stretching. Again, you'd have to be super aggressive, and the longer you sit there, maybe, with more aggression, it might happen more. So can static stretching possibly increase the risk of explosive maximum efforts? Sure. Yes, there's a possibility there. However, those studies don't say that you shouldn't do anything. They're just pointing out that static stretching may not be the best one. You would still consider dynamic stretching, which is kind of movements where you work through a full range of motion, but you get into a stretched end of range of motion, but you come back into a little bit of a contraction. So think of like if you're can handle your body weight well. So say like an athlete, like a football player, they might do, some walking lunges, like body weight walking lunges. I have other clients do what's called a leaning over Cossack squat. If you want to YouTube search this, you can type Brutal Iron Gym, leaning over, Leaning, leaning over, and then Cossack is Cossack's. Cossack. Cossack. Cossack squat. So if you look that up, it's basically just a side-to-side motion where you work through your adductors, you work through your hamstring connectors, your internal rotators, external rotators of the glutes. It's just a good way to kind of warm up the hips and everything. And it's super easy, very friendly. It's more friendly than a walking lunge is for most people. So there are other ways to prepare your muscles. You might, if you're a CrossFit athlete, maybe you get on like your bike, or Echo bike or whatever it is, and you kind of give that a run for 2 minutes. Maybe you get on a rower and just row for, 2 to 4 minutes. Maybe you get on your skier and do some odds and ends. You move around a little bit. The idea is you get some blood flow into the joints, you work the muscles loose from different tightnesses. So muscles come in, like if you've been sitting at a desk for 8 hours, and then you go into the gym and you want to squat, your body has tightened and kind of like locked itself into the position of however you sit, not what's optimal for a squat. There's not just free-flowing, open range of motion. We all know this. Like if you sit in a chair for a long time, then you try to stand up, you feel stiff, right? And you have to kind of take a couple steps before everything kind of works loose. That common sense. So when somebody says no to stretching before a workout, if they cite their reasoning as, static stretching might be increased risk, it's ridiculously partially thought through. Those studies, again, are only under extreme situations, and it doesn't mean that you shouldn't warm up at all. And that second kind of point that people make is it's a waste of time. They're like, well, if you only have an hour in the gym, or you only have 30 minutes in the gym, or blah, 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 you don't want to spend, all your time warming up and doing stretches. Sure, no shit. Okay. You don't have to do that. There's no reason why it would take 40 minutes to warm up for a squat. None at all. So, sure, if you mismanage it, can it be a waste of time? Absolutely. Duh. Just don't do that. So we have a warm-up kind of podcast 1112. So 1112, podcast 1112. It's a training podcast titled The Best Warm-Up Routine. You can do plenty fine movement preparations, kind of warm-ups for any major lifts in 10 minutes or less. No problem whatsoever. I do that all the time, all the time for my clients. So waste of time, that's only if you don't know how to properly perform your warm-ups, if you don't know what the proper focal points are or the organization of it, and that's where podcast 1112 can help. The third thing that you'll hear people say is, well, my warm-up sets act as my stretching. So if I go into the gym and I start squatting, just the act of squatting the bar starts to open up my muscles. Then I'll go to, 95 pounds. Then I'll go to 135 pounds. So they feel like just squatting itself is a way to warm up for squatting. That's archaic. One of the reasons why people tend to think that is I see a lot in bodybuilders because in bodybuilding it is not uncommon for somebody to perform isolation movements before they perform compound movements. It's actually a great technique to build big muscles and save and protect on your joints. It's called pre-exhaust. So it's fan-freaking-tastic. It's a thing that they know they're doing. But they might do leg extensions. They might do a couple hard sets of leg extensions. They're going to do their warm-ups for leg extensions and their couple hard sets. Maybe they do warm-ups and a couple hard sets for leg curls. And then they go squat. So they've already done a ton of movement that got blood flow into the joints and got them moving around before they would squat. So essentially, they used movement preparation in the form of leg extensions and leg curls. So you'll see that in bodybuilding all the time. So if you're doing isolation movements before compound movements, you arguably could say, I don't need to do like boring, basic, dynamic stretches or other kind of like what we would consider normal stretches. Sure, if you're doing some isolation movements before your compound movements, that's probably going to work pretty well. So that can help a lot. But if you're a strength athlete and you just want to come in and squat with a barbell, there's a lot of small irritations that happen when you come into the gym and you just start squatting right away. Typically, if you also train other lifts and you train your body, each time you come into the gym, you cause nervous system stress, you cause muscle tissue damage, you're going to feel some residual tightnesses. Now, this is common for, 99% of people. Some people, I know some Olympic lifters, they were like, well, I feel great every day. Once I get moving, I feel fine. I'm like, yeah, but you just said once you get moving, which means there's a little bit of time where you have to kind of work through the motions to get going. And then they also tend to repeat the exact same kind of movements 3, 4, 5 times a week. So they never get out of those positions enough to feel stiff enough to try to get back into them. So that's one factor. So they're always basically just kind of warming up and they're getting back into it before they feel too stiff from it. But there's small annoyances that happen. If you come in and you start squatting, you have to get into an extremely externally rotated kind of position in the shoulder to get your hands on the bar. And that typically is going to be a degree of stretch that you have not used outside of the gym. So in order to get into that position, you have to kind of pull and tug on the chest fibers, on the rotating fibers of the shoulder. And you might say, yeah, but it feels fine after a set or two. Well, that's like a static stretch. Basically, when you hold onto the bar and you haven't performed any kind of warm-up yet on your shoulder, you're statically stretching with the bar on your back. So you just shot yourself in the foot with that argument of how static stretches, maybe aren't good. So you're going to perform some type of stretch there. And then as you start to squat, it is true that squatting itself, just moving through the motion at a very submaximal weight load, it does cause increased kind of water flow and blood flow through the joints. It makes the muscles have to contract, release, and they eventually will start to kind of balance out like antagonist muscles on the joints, like your quadriceps. Like say, for example, your hip flexors will start to loosen if they are tight, and you'll feel a better balance between your hip flexor and your glutes, or your hip flexor and your upper hamstrings. You'll start to feel everything move a little bit smoother as you do some sets. Some of the issues, though, is for a lot of people, moving your body weight and a bar on your back to parallel, like maybe a set of 5 or 10 reps, it already does cause a little bit of micro annoyances around the joints, a little bit of inflammation, because those are such extreme positions we don't use outside of the gym. So you're having to like stretch into fibers that haven't been stretched into. So that starts to cause like some like irritation, and it starts to cause some micro tears. And then people tend to load the weight too fast. So they might, maybe they start at the bar, and then they, like maybe their max squat they're going to look for is 275. So they might do the bar 135, 225, then right to 275. That was way too fast. So the set of the bar only didn't properly loosen and balance the muscles around your joints in order to get to 135. So at 135, you pull and tug and tear on some things. Then you go all the way to 225, you pull and tug and tear on some things. So people tend not to spend enough time doing small increments of warm-ups. Then somebody would say, well, I'll just use the bar. Then I'll use maybe, like maybe that's 45 pounds. Maybe I'll go 75 pounds, then 105 pounds, then 135 pounds, then 165 pounds, maybe 185, then 205, then 225, then 245, then 265, then maybe I'll go 275. Well, holy hell, that's a lot of waste of time. So that's an inefficient way to warm up. There are much better ways to do than that you're going to get a lot more benefit from. So a good, healthy kind of movement preparation routine, you can work on shoulder mobility as well as thoracic mobility. You can work on core strength. You can work on hip mobility and hip strengthening. So you can get a lot more if you were to take that time and do a good, solid routine outside of the barbell squat. You're going to get a lot more bang for your buck, and then go back into the barbell squat and actually do then you can do bigger jumps in your warm-ups, but it's okay by then. So when you avoid stretching before an exercise, a big exercise, because of risk of injury, that's not correct. It's not true. It's not applicable, really. Waste of time, only if you're mismanaging it. And you might actually end up wasting just as much time doing more warm-up sets of the squat when you could be getting more bang for your buck by doing other things to warm up. And then if you do isolations before compound movements, that does kind of negate some of the need for as much warm-ups in the major compound movements. So that is its own way, kind of like a stretching before the big movement. So in general, the main reasons why you'd want to stretch is injury prevention. When you do small stretching and warm-up routines correctly, again, podcast 1112 will teach you how to do that. If you do it correctly, you balance out tightnesses around the joints. And if you move your body before those tightnesses are balanced out, it's like trying to move a puppet with some of the strings tied in knots. You're going to basically cause a lot of twisting and torquing within the joint that shouldn't have happened. That's going to cause a lot of inflammation and wear and tear. So you can avoid, man, my knee's kind of bugging me. That was probably from a couple weeks worth of things that you were doing that were dumb. So like a small kind of a chronic thing that keeps flaring up every now and then, you can usually alleviate a lot of those. And then you can alleviate definitely some major ping, I tore my hamstring right in the middle of a workout. You can eliminate that, which helps a lot. And just long-term, healthier mobility and improved mobility. So that not only does that prevent injury, but it increases and improves mobility. You have a more available range of motion that is actually pain-free to move through. So you have just more freedom of body movement when you do proper stretching and warm-ups before workouts. So if you're somebody who feels stiff and you're weak, you're stiff, and you're hoping that big heavy lifts will make you stronger, the warm-ups are going to go a hell of a lot more way towards your goal than those big heavy lifts. Big heavy lifts done without the warm-ups just cause more irritation and inflammation on your issues that already exist. So you might find, okay, yeah, I was able to get 4, 6, 8 weeks of heavy lifting in, but now all of a sudden everything kind of hurts and I feel like crap. Well, if you were to add a proper warm-up routine, you'd be totally fine. Just add a proper warm-up routine before you do all your heavy squats, and you can squat till the cows come home. So another big factor is improved performance. You can improve your positioning when all the muscles are equally balanced out around the joints. All the muscles feel strong and stable. So that's really important. Is a lot of proper warm-ups and stuff. They help strengthen and address the end of the fibers in those little nitty-gritty spots all around the joints. So you improve performance by being able to get into better positions and then better balance the musculature usage in those positions. Also, you improve performance through chemical preparation, which sounds really fancy. But when you do a proper warm-up, it should have some degree of kind of burning to it, get you a little out of breath, a little bit of discomfort in the sense of it's challenging, not that everything hurts. But it starts to kind of increase your natural production of endorphins, which increases your pain tolerance so you can push yourself harder in your workout to get a greater change stimulus out of your workout. It also starts to increase production of adrenaline, which is helpful for increasing your focus so you don't get so sidetracked, and increasing aggression so you feel more kind of just aggressive and ready to go and excited to work out. So benefits of warm-ups and stretching are a ton. They are way more beneficial, and they have a lot more pros than any kind of cons. And all the cons can be mitigated in some way for sure. So then 2 other points I'd want to kind of point out is if you also look at who has lasted in the sport of exercising and lifting. If you say, okay, who do I know or who do I see on social media that has been training for 20 plus years and they can still do what they would normally do. Maybe, if they squatted 700 pounds, maybe they're not squatting 700 pounds now, but they still squat. So they still move around. They still do what they preach, that kind of thing. Practice what you preach. If somebody's been around for 15, 20 years and they can still move in healthy, natural patterns, overwhelmingly, those people are going to be people who do stretches and movement preparation before they do heavy, big lifts. Overwhelmingly. Of course, there are some genetic freaks out there that would say, no, I never do that, and they still live for 20 years. Sure, okay, there's a couple. But I would say it's easily over 80%, maybe 90%. Of people who can be lifting for 15, 20 years, very consistently 3, 4, 5 times a week for 15 to 20 years, they're all going to do some type of movement preparation or some type of small stuff before they do their big, heavy stuff. Another point to point out is what do they recommend to fix and address injuries and issues around joints? If you went to physical therapy to help heal a joint, because you had pain in the joint, or maybe you just had surgery in the joint, stuff like that, what do they recommend? They recommend small movements. That's what physical therapy is. It's a bunch of small little movements. That is what you would use in movement preparation. I use that stuff all the time with all my clients. So I can't tell you how many times I've had clients where they have had some kind of injury, then we start working together and they're like, oh, this is the stuff my PT had me do. But yet we build extra things around it. We kind of put it in better sequence with bigger movements. We kind of take that PT when the insurance ran out and we kind of build on it and grow from it. So how do you get them from PT to a PR? That's what I do. That's where I come in. And I use physical therapy stuff all the time. I have so many freaking books. I have corrective exercise therapy certification, like specialist, whatever that is, that I have as a certification. But I have so many books in my office that are movement therapy based books, functional movement screenings and things like that. We use this stuff all the time in clients programming. And I have clients who are physical therapists. So, and they love all the stuff we do. So it's interesting that if somebody were to say, stretching isn't beneficial. Hell yeah, it is. I mean, you're just not doing it right, or you just haven't given it an honest effort. If you look at people who've been around 15, 20 years and they can still do cool shit, they all do small movements and stretching. If you look at what fixes injuries and tissues, it's all small movements, it's all stretching stuff. The stretching, it's injury prevention, it's increased mobility, it's improved performance. There's just a million things as to why stretching and kind of movement preparation before you do big, heavy compound lifts, it's overwhelmingly shown that you should definitely do some kind of movement preparation, some kind of stretching before you do your big, heavy compound lifts. So the question of whether people should perform some aspect of movement preparation shouldn't be a question. That question has been answered. That question is done. Okay? So check out podcast 1112. Put together a good routine for yourself. If you have any questions about it, just let me know. Email me at brutalirongym@gmail.com. Well, thank you for listening. I hope all this stuff is super helpful in the sense that people feel encouraged to come and ask questions. Hopefully I answer most of these without sounding like a total jackass. But I do encourage the questions. I love the questions. I love being able to help and teach things so people get to more educated places of knowledge faster. So you don't have to waste so much time that I did or get as many injuries and stuff as I did. So I want you to learn from myself, learn from all my years of experience, learn from the education and whatnot that I've been able to, been blessed to receive. So hopefully this stuff is helpful. Send any questions all the time. Again, our email is brutalirongym@gmail.com. Okay, well, if you like today's podcast, the podcast in general, please consider sharing the podcast. The more people we share it with, the more people we can help. That's the whole point of it. That's the whole reason why we do it. You can share it on social media. You can share it in a conversation with a friend, however you do it. I appreciate that you do it. Thank you to the patrons of the podcast, people who financially support the podcast, which you can now do on our website. So the podcast is actually well over $1,000 a year. I give an hour to it every day, and we want to keep it for free. So thank you to the donations to help cover some of that cost, which I really appreciate. And again, you can donate at our website, www.brutalirongym.com. There's an option there for a one-time donation, monthly donation, yearly donation. Anything you can give, even just $5 a month, it goes a long way. Thank you very much. Also, if you like the information we share in the podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. If you have any questions, feedback, suggestions, anything you want to know, let us know at our email at brutalirongym@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.